Sign the papers, Dad. It's over. Daniel stood in the doorway, his wife Vanessa's hand possessively on his shoulder. The evening sun cast long shadows across the farmhouse kitchen, where I'd raised my son alone after his mother died. "You know I can't do that," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "This farm has been in our family for 4 generations. Vanessa's lips curled into a smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Morgan, we've already lined up buyers. The developers are offering $3 million. That's enough for all of us to live comfortably." I clutched the edge of the kitchen table, my knuckles white. "And what about the promises we made? What about your heritage, Daniel?" "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Daniel said, not meeting my eyes. I pulled open the drawer beside me, removing a folder I'd kept hidden for 5 years. "Before you force me out of my home, there's something your wife should know about her parents' mortgage." Vanessa's smile vanished. "What did you just say?" "Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. They say the deepest wounds come from those we love the most. I never thought my son would be the one holding the knife. My name is Harold Morgan, and for 40 years, this 80-acre farm has been everything to me. I poured my sweat, tears, and dreams into this soil after my wife Sarah died, leaving me to raise our son, Daniel, alone. I remember the day I placed my 4-year-old boy on my shoulders, walking the boundaries of our land, telling him, "Someday, son, all this will be yours." He'd laughed, reaching for the clouds, innocent to the weight of those words, the weight of legacy. Now, at 65, I stood on my porch watching moving trucks arrive. The farm was being sold out from under me, and my own flesh and blood had made it possible. All because of her, Vanessa. My daughter-in-law had spent 3 years convincing my son that our family legacy was nothing but a financial burden. What none of them realized was that I'd been holding a secret. 5 years ago, when the bank was foreclosing on George and Martha Palmer's property, Vanessa's parents, I quietly purchased their mortgage. Not out of spite, but because I'd once promised George's father I'd look after his family if times got hard. They never knew their debt had been transferred to me. I never told a soul. Until now. I walked back into my study, opening the antique desk that had belonged to my grandfather. Inside lay 2 documents side by side, the eviction notice Daniel had served me, and the mortgage papers for the Palmer residence with my signature on the lien. I traced my fingers over the mortgage document, feeling the weight of the decision before me. Would I use this knowledge as a weapon? Or was there another way to save what generations of Morgans had built? The door behind me creaked open. Daniel stood there, his face a mask of determination and guilt. "The movers need access to your study, Dad." I carefully folded the Palmer mortgage and slid it into my pocket. "Come in, son. There's something you need to see first." His eyes narrowed with suspicion as he stepped inside, unaware that what I was about to reveal would change everything for all of us. The bond between father and son is sacred. At least, that's what I always believed. I remember the day Daniel was born, how I'd held his tiny body against my chest and promised Sarah I'd give him everything. After she passed from cancer when he was only 3, that promise became my North Star. "Do you remember this?" I asked Daniel, pulling the antique pocket watch from my desk drawer. The gold case gleamed in the afternoon light, the Morgan family crest etched on its surface, worn smooth from generations of thumbs. Something softened in Daniel's eyes. "Dad's retirement gift to you." "And my father's father before him," I said. 5 generations of Morgan men have carried this watch while working this land. Daniel's shoulders sagged as he took the watch, running his thumb over the familiar engraving. For a moment, I saw my boy again, not the stranger who'd served me eviction papers. "Vanessa says we can't afford sentiment," he muttered. "When did you start believing that everything has a price tag?" I asked gently. The day Daniel brought Vanessa home, I'd been hopeful. She was beautiful, educated, and charming. They'd met at an agricultural conference where she represented a large development firm. The irony doesn't escape me now. "She makes me happy, Dad," Daniel said, his voice defensive. "I know, son. I've never questioned that." What I'd questioned were her intentions. 3 months after their first date, I overheard her on the phone in our garden. "The old man's sitting on a gold mine," she'd said, unaware I was around the corner. "Daniel doesn't see it yet, but I'm working on him. Once we sell, we'll have enough to start over somewhere that matters." I never told Daniel what I'd heard. Perhaps that was my first mistake. I watched them marry on this very property, beneath the ancient oak where I'd wed Sarah decades earlier. During their vows, Vanessa's eyes had drifted to the rolling hills behind us, assessing, calculating. "Remember when I taught you to drive the tractor?" I asked, breaking the silence that had fallen between us. "You couldn't have been more than 9. A reluctant smile tugged at Daniel's lips. "You put pillows on the seat so I could reach the pedals. You drove us straight into the pond," I chuckled. "And you weren't even mad," he said, the memory momentarily bridging the chasm between us. "You just said, 'Morgan men learn by doing,'" we finished together. For a fleeting second, we were connected again. Father and son. But then Vanessa's voice called from the hallway. "Daniel, the movers need direction on the antiques." His expression hardened, the moment lost. He set the pocket watch down on the desk with a finality that broke my heart. "We can't keep living in the past, Dad. The farm hasn't turned a profit in 3 years. The drought is temporary," I insisted. "We've weathered worse." "Vanessa found buyers willing to pay $3 million, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "That's enough for you to live comfortably in a nice retirement community, and for us to start fresh." "And what about your children someday?" I asked. "What will you leave them?" "A debt-free future," he answered, echoing words that weren't his own. The door creaked again as Vanessa appeared, her sleek business attire out of place against the weathered farmhouse walls. She looked between us, sensing the tension. "Everything okay in here?" she asked, her smile practiced and perfect. Before Daniel could answer, I reached for the folder I'd set aside, the one containing the Palmer mortgage. My fingers brushed its surface, the power it held. One revelation could change the entire dynamic. But looking at my son's face, I hesitated. Would exposing Vanessa's parents' financial vulnerability drive Daniel even further from me? Or would it open his eyes to the woman he'd married? "Mr. Morgan," Vanessa said, her voice honeyed but impatient, "we really need to clear this room today." I withdrew my hand from the folder, leaving it on the desk. Not yet. The time wasn't right. "Of course," I said, standing slowly. "I just needed a moment with my son." As I walked past Vanessa, her perfume expensive and unfamiliar, I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Triumph, perhaps. She believed she'd won. Little did she know, the game had only just begun. "We've already signed a preliminary agreement with Horizon Developments," Vanessa announced the next morning, sliding glossy brochures across the kitchen table. "They're planning a luxury residential community with a golf course." I stared at the images of modern homes where my cornfield stood, where Daniel had taken his first steps, where Sarah was buried beneath the willow tree. A golf course, I repeated, my voice hollow. On farmland that's fed this community for a century. Daniel at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. It's just business, Dad. Is that what we've become? Business? I pushed away from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor Sarah had loved so much. Vanessa placed a manicured hand on Daniel's arm, her diamond ring catching the light. Mr. Morgan, we understand this is difficult. Change always is. But Daniel and I have been discussing this for months. The farm is no longer viable. Months? I turned to my son. You've been planning this for months without saying a word to me? The shame that flashed across Daniel's face told me everything. This wasn't a recent decision. This was a calculated campaign. You have to understand, he began, but Vanessa interrupted. The numbers don't lie, she said, pulling out spreadsheets. The farm has been operating at a loss since the drought began. Between equipment repairs and the failed irrigation system. Those are temporary setbacks, I countered. Every farmer faces challenges. At your age, should you really be facing more challenges? Vanessa's voice dripped with false concern. Daniel worries about you constantly. The physical strain, the financial stress. I looked at my son, searching for the boy who once declared he'd die defending our land. Instead, I found a man who couldn't meet my eyes. Is that true, Daniel? You think I'm too old to handle this farm? I think, he said carefully, that you deserve to rest, to enjoy your golden years without worrying about crop prices and weather forecasts. This farm is not a burden, I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to remain calm. It's who we are. It's who you are. It's who I was, he corrected gently. The words hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I realized how completely I'd lost him. I need some air, I muttered, heading for the door. Outside, the morning sun painted the fields gold, the same fields that would soon be covered in asphalt and artificial turf. I walked to Sarah's willow tree, my feet following the path worn by 20 years of daily visits. What would you do, Sarah? I whispered, resting my hand against the rough bark. How do I make him remember who he is? Only the whisper of leaves answered me. When I returned to the house an hour later, a black sedan was parked in the driveway. Through the window, I could see Vanessa animatedly talking with a man in an expensive suit, presumably from Horizon Developments. I entered through the side door, intending to avoid the meeting, when I overheard their conversation from the living room. The old man's the only obstacle, Vanessa was saying. Once he's relocated, we can expedite everything. Relocated? The man asked. We've found a very nice assisted living facility in Springfield, she explained. All the paperwork has been prepared. Daniel will have power of attorney by next week. My blood ran cold. Power of attorney? Assisted living? They weren't just taking my farm. They were taking my freedom. I stepped into the doorway, making my presence known. Is that so? Vanessa's head whipped around, her composure momentarily slipping. The businessman looked uncomfortably between us. Mr. Morgan, she recovered quickly. This is Robert Keller from Horizon. We were just discussing timeline options. And my institutionalization, apparently, I said coldly. Daniel walked in from the kitchen, confusion on his face. Dad, what are you talking about? Ask your wife about the assisted living facility she's picked out for me. Ask her about the power of attorney. Daniel turned to Vanessa, his expression unreadable. What is he talking about? For the first time, I saw panic flicker across her perfect features. It's just a contingency plan, honey. For down the road, when he might need more care. I'm not senile yet, I said, my anger building. Though that would be convenient for you, wouldn't it? The businessman cleared his throat. Perhaps I should come back another time. No, I said firmly, stepping fully into the room. You should know exactly what you're buying. This land has Morgan blood in it. My grandfather lost 3 fingers digging the irrigation trenches. My father died of a heart attack in the North Field. My wife is buried under that willow tree out there. I turned to Daniel. And you're willing to let strangers bulldoze her grave for a golf course? The color drained from his face. What? No. Vanessa said we'd relocate Mom's. I have the deed to this property, I cut in, pulling it from my pocket. And despite what your wife may have told you, I haven't signed anything transferring ownership. Not to you, not to anyone. Vanessa's face hardened. That's just a formality. The family trust. The family trust that I control, I interrupted. Maybe you should have read the fine print, Vanessa. Nothing happens to this land without my signature. The businessman stood awkwardly. I think I'll give your family some space to work this out. As he hastily gathered his materials, I noticed a document among his papers, legal paperwork with my name on it. I snatched it before he could stop me. What's this? I demanded, scanning the pages. My hands began to shake as I read. A psychiatric evaluation? Declaring me mentally incompetent? The room fell deathly silent as I looked up at my son, betrayal burning in my chest. Did you know about this? The answer was written all over his face. The silence in that room felt like the calm before a tornado. I'd seen that eerie stillness once, back in '87, right before a twister tore through the western fields. The same heavy anticipation hung in the air now as Daniel stared at the psychiatric evaluation in my hands. Let me explain, Vanessa started, her voice steady despite the tension. Explain forging a medical assessment? I held up the papers. Explain having me declared incompetent without my knowledge? Daniel stepped forward. Dad, it's not like that. We're worried about you. The doctor said, What doctor? When did I see any doctor about my mental state? I looked between them, realization dawning. You invented this. This is fraud. It's a preliminary assessment, Vanessa said smoothly, based on behaviors we've documented over the past year. Your forgetfulness, your resistance to change, your emotional attachment to inanimate objects? You mean my memories? My life? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Son, do you actually think I'm losing my mind? Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes. You talk to Mom like she's still here. The accusation stung like a physical blow. Yes, I spoke to Sarah at her willow tree. It gave me comfort. It didn't make me insane. So, visiting your mother's grave makes me incompetent? I asked quietly. It's more than that, Vanessa interjected. The neighbors have noticed too. Mrs. Peterson saw you wandering the fields at midnight last month. Checking irrigation lines during a drought isn't wandering, I snapped. Robert Keller, the Horizon developer, edged toward the door. I should really go. Clearly there are family matters to resolve before we proceed. Vanessa's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing panic. No, please. This is a minor setback. We have everything under control. Doesn't look that way to me, ma'am, Keller said, eyeing me warily. Call me when you have clear title to the property. After he left, the three of us stood in a triangle of tension. Daniel broke the silence first. Dad, we're trying to help you. The farm is failing. You're working yourself to exhaustion for nothing. Nothing? My voice cracked. Is that what our family legacy is to you now? Nothing? Vanessa sighed dramatically. Mr. Morgan, you're making this so much harder than it needs to be. The evaluation is just a precaution. If you'd simply sign the transfer papers voluntarily." "Get out," I said quietly. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Get out of my house. Now." Daniel stepped between us. "Dad, that's enough. This is my wife you're talking to." "And this is my home she's trying to steal through fraud," I countered. "I want her off my property. Today." "Then I'm going too," Daniel said, his jaw set in that stubborn way he'd had since childhood. "Where she goes, I go." The words shouldn't have surprised me, but they cut deep all the same. "Fine," I said, my voice hollow. "Take what's yours and go." "Dad, just go." I watched from the porch as they loaded the last of Daniel's belongings into his truck. Vanessa didn't look back once, but my son paused before climbing into the driver's seat, his eyes meeting mine across the yard. For a moment, I thought he might change his mind. Then Vanessa said something to him, and he got in the truck. As their taillights disappeared down the long driveway, I felt more alone than I had since Sarah died. I reached for the porch railing to steady myself, my legs suddenly weak. What would I do now? They'd be back, of course. Vanessa wouldn't give up on $3 million so easily. And that psychiatric evaluation still existed, fraudulent though it was. How long before they tried to use it against me legally? I needed help, but who could I turn to? Most of my old friends had either died or moved away. The farm had been my whole world for so long that I'd let other connections wither. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, the Palmer mortgage spread out before me. In the yellow lamplight, George and Martha Palmer's signatures seemed to mock me. I'd held this secret for 5 years, never intending to use it as leverage. But then, I'd never imagined my own son would try to have me declared incompetent. The next morning, I drove into town for the first time in weeks. At the bank, I requested a meeting with Jim Sullivan, the manager who'd handled my accounts for 20 years. "Harold," he greeted me warmly. "Good to see you out and about. What can I do for you today?" "I need information about a mortgage I hold," I said, sliding the papers across his desk. "The Palmer property on Oak Ridge Road." Jim reviewed the documents, nodding. "Yes, you purchased this from First Federal 5 years ago. What about it?" "What's the payoff amount?" He tapped at his computer. "As of today, $178,432.16. The Palmers have never missed a payment, though they don't know you're the lien holder, of course." I nodded. The bank served as an intermediary, accepting payments on my behalf while keeping my identity confidential. "What if I were to call the loan?" I asked. Jim's eyebrows rose. "You can do that if they violate any terms, have they?" "No," I admitted, "but legally, could I demand immediate payment?" "There's an acceleration clause," he said, pointing to a paragraph in the contract. "But Harold, that would likely force them into foreclosure." "I thought George Palmer was an old friend." "His father was," I said quietly. "Things change." On my way home, I took a detour past the Palmer residence, a modest 2-story house with a well-kept garden. Vanessa had grown up there, unaware that for the past 5 years I controlled the roof over her parents' heads. I sat in my truck, watching Martha Palmer water her flowers. She waved, recognizing my vehicle, and I waved back mechanically. These were good people who had done nothing wrong. Using their mortgage against them, against Vanessa, felt wrong on every level. But what choice did I have? My son and his wife were trying to take everything from me. Not just my land, but my dignity, my autonomy. Back at the farm, I found a business card tucked into my screen door. Robert Keller from Horizon Developments had stopped by in my absence. He'd written a note on the back. "Mr. Morgan, Please call me. I think we should talk privately." I stared at the card for a long time, turning it over in my fingers. The developer wanted to cut Vanessa and Daniel out of the deal. Go directly to the source. It was a betrayal of my son, but hadn't he already betrayed me? As the sun set over fields that had been in my family for generations, I made my decision. I reached for the phone and dialed the number on the business card. "Mr. Keller? This is Harold Morgan. I believe we have something to discuss." "Indeed we do, Mr. Morgan," he replied. "I've learned some very interesting information about your daughter-in-law that I think you'll want to hear. She's been planning this for years." Robert Keller sat across from me at my kitchen table the next morning. A folder of documents spread between us. His revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. Vanessa Palmer approached Horizon Developments 3 years ago, shortly after she and your son became engaged, he continued. She identified your property as underutilized agricultural land with significant development potential. I picked up a printed email with Vanessa's name in the signature block. The date stamp showed it was sent just 2 weeks after Daniel had proposed to her. "She didn't even have his last name yet," I murmured. Keller nodded grimly. "Ms. Palmer, now Mrs. Morgan, has worked with 3 different development companies over the past few years. Each time, the negotiations fell through for various reasons. And now she's working with you," I said. "Initially, yes." He straightened his tie uncomfortably. "Mr. Morgan, I'm here because something about this situation doesn't sit right with me. When I saw that psychiatric evaluation yesterday—" "A forgery," I interjected. "I suspected as much," he agreed. "I've been in this business 20 years. I've seen family disputes over valuable land before, but nothing this calculated." I leaned back in my chair, studying the man. Robert Keller was no saint. He was still a developer who wanted my farm, but at least he seemed to have some scruples. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Don't you want the land?" "Horizon wants the land," he corrected. "But we want clean deals. No lawsuits, no family feuds splashed across the local papers. Bad publicity kills projects faster than zoning boards." I understood then. This wasn't about ethics. It was about risk management. Still, his information was valuable. "There's something else you should know," Keller said, pulling another document from his briefcase. "Your daughter-in-law has considerable debt. Credit cards, a personal loan, and this—" He handed me a court filing. As I read it, my hands began to shake. A judgment against her parents' property? I looked up in disbelief. She sued her own parents? 3 years ago, Keller confirmed. Apparently, they borrowed money from her for home repairs and couldn't repay it. The court granted her a secondary lien on their property. I felt sick. The Palmers had a second mortgage, held by their own daughter, and didn't even know I controlled their primary mortgage. And now Vanessa was leveraging both her parents and her husband to get what she wanted. Does Daniel know about this? I asked. Keller shook his head. Based on my conversations with them, I don't believe so. The pieces suddenly fit together. Vanessa's desperate push to sell my farm wasn't just about greed. She needed the money to cover her own financial problems. And she was willing to sacrifice both her husband's inheritance and her parents' security to solve them. After Keller left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of Vanessa's deception. The farmhouse felt too quiet, too empty without Daniel. Despite everything, I missed my son. I pulled out the antique pocket watch, running my thumb over the worn Morgan crest. 5 generations of my family had carried it while working this land. Would it end with me? A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I half expected to see Daniel, but instead found George Palmer on my porch, hat in hand. "Harold," he greeted me awkwardly. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I said, stepping back to let him in. "What brings you by, George?" He twisted his hat nervously. "It's about the kids, Daniel and Vanessa. Martha and I are worried." I gestured for him to sit. "Worried how?" "They showed up at our place last night, asking to stay for a while. Said you and Daniel had a falling out over selling the farm." He looked up at me. "Is that true?" "Partly," I admitted. "There's more to it than that." "I figured." George sighed heavily. "Vanessa was making calls all evening. Sounded like she was talking to lawyers. Something about competency hearings?" My jaw tightened. "She's trying to have me declared incompetent so they can sell my farm without my consent." George's face paled. "Jesus, Harold, I had no idea it had gone that far." "There's more," I said, making a split-second decision. "Something you should know about your house." His expression turned wary. "My house? What about it?" I hesitated. Was I really going to do this? Use the mortgage as a weapon? But as I looked into the confused face of Vanessa's father, another path suddenly became clear. "George, do you trust me?" I asked instead. "Known you 40 years, he replied cautiously. "You've always been a straight shooter." "Then I need you to do something," I said. "Don't tell Vanessa or Daniel that you came to see me today. And if you can, find out exactly what they're planning." He studied me for a long moment. "You think my daughter's up to something bad, don't you?" "I think Vanessa is desperate," I answered carefully. "And desperate people make dangerous choices." After George left, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, requesting an emergency appointment. The second was to an old friend at the county records office. By evening, I had what I needed: documentation proving that Vanessa had attempted to transfer my property through fraudulent means. I also had copies of her lien against her parents' home and evidence of her considerable personal debt. I was loading these documents into my truck when headlights swept across the driveway. Daniel's truck pulled up, and my son stepped out alone. "We need to talk, Dad," he called, walking toward me. "I was just leaving," I replied, closing the truck door. "It's important." His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "Vanessa's been lying to me. To all of us." I froze. "What do you mean?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly young and lost. "I found papers in her bag, a judgment against her parents' house, credit card statements with massive debt. And this," he held out a familiar document, a copy of the same psychiatric evaluation I'd seen yesterday. "She forged my signature," he said, his voice breaking. "I never agreed to have you declared incompetent. Never." Relief and vindication washed over me, but the pain in my son's eyes tempered my reaction. "Daniel!" "And that's not all," he continued, his face ashen. "I found another document, something about her parents' mortgage being sold 5 years ago." He looked up at me, confusion clouding his features. "Dad, why was your name on that paper?" The moment hung between us like a storm cloud. My son stood in the driveway, holding evidence of both his wife's betrayal and my own secret. "Dad?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Is it true? Do you own her parents' mortgage?" I leaned against my truck, suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. "Come inside, son. This isn't a conversation for the driveway." Back in the kitchen, I poured us each a finger of whiskey. Daniel hadn't touched alcohol since college, but he drained his glass in one swallow. "Start talking," he said, his eyes hard in a way I'd never seen before. I took a deep breath. 5 years ago, the bank was foreclosing on the Palmer property. George had been laid off, and they were 3 months behind on payments. And you bought their mortgage? Why? George's father saved mine during the flood of '72, pulled him from the creek when he was caught in the current. I promised I'd look after his family if they ever needed help. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass. So when I heard about the foreclosure, I went to the bank and purchased the debt. The Palmers never knew. They just kept making payments, thinking the bank still held the note. Daniel paced the kitchen, processing this revelation. And her parents? Do they know she has a lien against their property? I doubt it, I said. George would have mentioned it when he visited today. He was here? Daniel stopped pacing. What did he say? That Vanessa's been making calls to lawyers about competency hearings. I met my son's gaze. She's moving forward with having me declared incompetent, Daniel, with or without your support. He slammed his palm against the counter. God damn it! I told her to drop it. I told her I wouldn't be part of it. The raw pain in his voice reached something deep inside me. Whatever his mistakes, my son wasn't the architect of this betrayal. When did you find out? I asked gently. Last night. He ran a hand through his hair. After we left here, we went to her parents. She was upset, making calls in the guest room. I overheard her talking about expediting the competency hearing. His voice broke. She said you were deteriorating rapidly and a danger to yourself. And that's when you searched her things? He nodded. While she was in the shower this morning. I found everything. The debt, the lien against her parents, the forged papers with my signature. His eyes met mine, full of shame. Dad, I swear I didn't know. I believe you, I said quietly. Relief washed over his face, followed quickly by determination. We need to stop her. She's meeting with a lawyer tomorrow morning. I've already called mine, I said. But Daniel, there's something you need to understand. Vanessa isn't just greedy. She's desperate. What are you going to do? Daniel asked. I considered my options. I could use the Palmer mortgage as leverage against Vanessa. I could expose her to her parents. I could fight her competency claims in court. First, I said, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. How much does she know? And what's her next move? She thinks I'm picking up dinner, Daniel said, checking his watch. I should get back before she suspects anything. You're going back? I couldn't hide my surprise. I need to know what she's planning. His jaw tightened. And I need to decide what kind of man I'm going to be. As Daniel reached for his keys, I placed a hand on his shoulder. Whatever happens, son, remember who you are. You're a Morgan. This land, this legacy, it's in your blood. I know, Dad. For the first time in years, I saw the boy I'd raised in the man before me. I won't forget again. After he left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the weight of decades pressing down on me. I pulled out the pocket watch, opening it to reveal the inscription inside. Time passes, but legacy endures. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. Tonight, I needed clarity. I walked out to Sarah's willow, the moon casting silver shadows across the fields. What would you do, love? I whispered to the night air. How do we save our son? How do we save our home? The gentle rustling of leaves was my only answer. But somehow, it was enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. She's making another call to the lawyer. Claims to have more evidence of your incompetence. They're moving fast. I texted back, come home, now. Another text arrived moments later. She found the mortgage documents in my coat pocket. She knows everything. Dawn broke with no word from Daniel. I'd called repeatedly through the night, each unanswered ring tightening the knot in my stomach. Where was my son? What had Vanessa done? My lawyer, Patricia Delaney, arrived at 8, her no-nonsense attitude a comfort in the chaos. Harold, I've reviewed everything. The psychiatric evaluation is clearly fraudulent. We can fight this. Daniel's missing, I said, pacing the kitchen. He texted last night that Vanessa found the mortgage documents. Then nothing. Patricia's expression grew serious. Let's not jump to conclusions. Have you tried the Palmers? Before I could answer, tires crunched on the gravel driveway. Through the window, I saw George Palmer's old pickup truck skidding to a stop. He leaped out, face ashen. "Harold!" he shouted, bursting through the door. "They're gone!" "Who's gone?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Vanessa and Daniel and Martha." George's voice cracked. "I woke up this morning, and the house was empty. Vanessa left this." He thrust a note into my hands. The elegant handwriting was unmistakably Vanessa's. "Dad, I have Mom and Daniel. Don't involve Harold or the police if you want to see either of them again. Bring the deed to your house and the mortgage documents to the old mill at noon. Come alone." "My God," I whispered. "She's lost her mind." "She's desperate," Patricia corrected grimly. "And desperate people are dangerous." "We need to call the police," I insisted, reaching for the phone. George grabbed my arm. "No! The note says—" "I don't care what it says," I snapped. "This is kidnapping," Patricia intervened. "Harold, wait. Let's think this through. Vanessa's not a violent person. She's a manipulator. This is a power play, not a physical threat." "How can you know that?" I demanded. "Because I've dealt with hundreds of divorce cases," she replied calmly. "This is about leverage, not harm." I forced myself to breathe, to think. "The old mill is on my property, the abandoned one by the creek." "She's keeping them close," Patricia noted. "That's actually a good sign." "It's almost 11, George said, checking his watch. "What's the plan?" I moved to my safe, spinning the combination with steady hands despite the fear churning inside me. "We give her what she wants." "Harold, no," Patricia protested. "Once you hand over those documents—" "I'm not giving her the originals," I interrupted, pulling out the folder. "I'm giving her copies. The originals are filed with the county clerk." George looked between us, confusion etched on his weathered face. "What about the deed to my house?" "We'll deal with that when we find them," I said, gathering the papers. "First, we need to make sure Martha and Daniel are safe." The abandoned mill stood at the edge of my property, its weathered timbers a testament to another era. As we approached, I motioned for George and Patricia to hang back, while I moved forward alone. "Vanessa?" I called out, my voice echoing against the stone foundation. "I'm here." She emerged from the shadows, immaculately dressed despite the circumstances, not a hair out of place. "Right on time, Harold. Always the reliable farmer." "Where are they?" I demanded. "Safe," she replied coolly. "Daniel took Martha into town for breakfast. They're at the diner. Perfectly fine." Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by anger. "You manipulative." "Careful," she warned. "I still have the psychiatric evaluation. One call to my lawyer, and the competency hearing proceeds." "With forged documents?" I scoffed. "Daniel will testify against you." Something flickered across her perfect features. Uncertainty, perhaps, or fear. "Do you have what I asked for?" I held up the folder. "Everything. Now tell me why we're really here." "Isn't it obvious?" she asked. her composure slipping slightly. I need out. From this town, from these people, from this life. And the mortgage? The deed to your parents' house? Insurance, she said simply. Once I have control of both properties, I can leverage them for what I need. Enough money to start over somewhere that matters. I studied her, seeing clearly for the first time the wounded child beneath the polished exterior. What happened to you, Vanessa? For a moment, vulnerability flashed across her face. Then the mask slid back into place. The documents, Harold. Now. I held out the folder, but as she reached for it, I pulled back slightly. There's another way, you know. A way that doesn't destroy the people who love you. She laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the mill walls. Love? Is that what you call it? My parents' suffocating mediocrity? Daniel's blind devotion to dirt and nostalgia? Your stubborn refusal to see the future? I call it family, I said quietly. Something worth more than money. Her hand trembled as she snatched the folder. We'll see how much family is worth when the bank forecloses on your precious farm. Those are copies, I said, as Vanessa flipped through the documents. The originals are filed with the county clerk. You can't do anything with those. Her composure cracked. You're lying! Am I? I held her gaze steadily. Check the bottom of the mortgage document. See the county clerk's stamp? That's not on the original I keep in my safe. She fumbled through the papers, her perfect manicure scratching against the paper as she searched for confirmation. When she found it, the color drained from her face. This was a waste of time, she spat, flinging the folder to the ground. You think you're so clever, don't you? The wise old farmer outsmarting the greedy city girl. This isn't about outsmarting anyone, Vanessa. It's about stopping the damage before it's irreparable. Damage? She laughed bitterly. You have no idea what real damage is. Try growing up watching your parents count pennies at the grocery store. Try wearing hand-me-downs to school and pretending they're new. Try promising yourself you'll never end up like them, only to marry into a family that values dirt over ambition. Her raw pain surprised me. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of compassion. Is that what this is about? Escaping your childhood? It's about getting what I deserve, she insisted, but her voice had lost its edge. $3 million for that worthless farm would have fixed everything. There's nothing to fix, Vanessa, not about you. I took a step closer. The debt, the desperation. Those can be addressed. But this path you're on will cost you everything that matters. What would you know about it? She asked, but I could see uncertainty in her eyes. More than you think. I gestured toward the mill. My grandfather built this mill during the Depression. Worked himself to the bone. Not for money. We never had much of that. For legacy. For family. For something that would endure beyond his lifetime. She looked away. Touching story. But times change. People don't, I countered. Not at their core. Deep down, we all want the same things. Security, purpose, connection. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted us. Daniel's truck appeared, followed closely by Patricia's sedan. My son leaped out, his face tight with anger. Vanessa! He shouted, striding toward us. What the hell are you doing? Martha Palmer emerged from the passenger side, looking confused but unharmed. George rushed to her, enveloping her in a protective embrace. Vanessa's mask slipped completely, revealing panic. Daniel, I can explain. Explain what? He demanded. The text telling me to bring your mother to the diner? The note threatening her safety? The lies about a competency hearing for my father? She backed away as he approached. You don't understand. I had to... Had to what? Manipulate everyone? Threaten your own mother? Daniel's voice broke with emotion. Who are you? I don't even recognize you anymore. Vanessa looked frantically between Daniel and her parents, finding no allies. You're all against me. You always have been. Martha stepped forward, her gentle face lined with sorrow. No, sweetheart. We've only ever wanted what's best for you, even when we couldn't give you everything you wanted. Then why wouldn't you help me? Vanessa demanded, tears finally breaking through her perfect facade. When I needed money for the debts, why did you refuse? Because we couldn't afford it, George said simply. We would have lost our home. Our home, she repeated bitterly, the one Harold secretly controls. Martha's confused gaze turned to me. What is she talking about? I sighed heavily. It's complicated, Martha, but I promise you, your home was never at risk. Not from me. Daniel moved to stand beside me, father and son united. It's over, Vanessa. The schemes, the lies, all of it. She looked between us, calculating even now. What happens to me? That depends, I said, on whether you're willing to find another way out of this mess, a way that doesn't involve destroying two families. For a long moment, Vanessa stood alone, cornered by the truth. Then something shifted in her expression. Resignation, perhaps, or the first glimmer of genuine remorse. I don't know any other way, she whispered. Daniel's face softened slightly. Then maybe it's time you learned. Patricia stepped forward, ever practical. I suggest we continue this discussion somewhere more comfortable. There are legal matters to address, but also human ones. As we walked back toward our vehicles, Vanessa fell into step beside her mother, their shoulders nearly touching but not quite, like two people who had forgotten how to connect. Daniel hung back with me, watching them go. What do we do now, Dad? I placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength there. We find a solution that preserves what matters most. The farm? He asked. The people, I corrected him. The farm is just land without the people who love it. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning. You're willing to compromise. On the right things, I agreed, for the right reasons. Ahead of us, George helped Martha into their truck, their hands linked in unconscious solidarity. Beside them, Vanessa stood alone, her perfect posture finally beginning to crumble under the weight of truth. She's still my wife, Daniel said quietly, despite everything. I squeezed his shoulder. The question is, will she still be your wife tomorrow? Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. And some can, he countered, pulling the family pocket watch from his jacket. With the right materials and enough determination. As we drove back to the farmhouse, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the faint stirring of hope. Sometimes, the breaking point isn't the end of the story. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of a different one. The kitchen table had seen 4 generations of Morgan family decisions: marriages proposed, children named, crops planted, loans negotiated. Now it witnessed something entirely new: a reckoning between two families bound by marriage, money, and secrets. Vanessa sat stiffly between her parents, her makeup smudged but her spine rigid with pride. Daniel occupied the chair beside me, our shoulders nearly touching in silent solidarity. Patricia spread documents across the weathered oak surface, each page representing a strand in the tangled web we'd created. Let's address the immediate issues, she began pragmatically. First, the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation needs to be formally withdrawn. Vanessa nodded reluctantly. I've already called my lawyer. Second, the lien against the Palmer residence. Patricia glanced at George and Martha. Were you aware your daughter held a secondary claim against your property? Martha's gentle face crumpled. No. We knew we borrowed money for the roof repair, but we've been sending monthly payments. We thought it was a family loan, not a legal lien. $12,000, George added, his voice tight. With $200 paid monthly for 3 years, that's $7,200 so far. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. The interest was never discussed, Martha interrupted, uncharacteristic sharpness in her tone. You're our daughter, not a bank. The truth hung heavy in the air. Vanessa had leveraged her own parents' financial vulnerability, just as she'd attempted to use Daniel and me. And finally, Patricia continued, there's the matter of Harold's ownership of the primary mortgage on the Palmer residence. George looked at me, confusion and hurt evident in his weathered face. Why, Harold? All these years, why keep it secret? I met his gaze steadily. Pride, mostly. Yours and mine. Would you have accepted if I'd offered to buy your mortgage outright? No, he admitted, but that wasn't your decision to make. You're right, I acknowledged. I thought I was helping, but I was also controlling. I'm sorry for that. Martha reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. Your intentions were good, Harold. That counts for something. Vanessa watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. And my intentions? Do they count for nothing? Daniel spoke for the first time since we'd gathered. What were your intentions, Vanessa? Beyond getting money? What did you really want? Something flickered across her perfect features. Vulnerability, perhaps, or the ghost of genuine emotion. Security, she said finally. Control over my own life. Freedom from worry. At any cost? Daniel asked quietly. Even destroying your family? Mine? She looked down at her manicured hands. I didn't see it that way. I saw opportunity, solutions to problems. The problem, I interjected gently, is that you cannot build security on the insecurity of others, not lasting security. A heavy silence fell over the table as we each contemplated the choices that had brought us to this moment. The ancient refrigerator hummed in the background, a reminder of simpler times. So, what happens now? George finally asked, addressing no one in particular. Patricia tapped her pen against her legal pad. That depends on what outcome everyone wants. 5 pairs of eyes turned to Vanessa. Despite everything, she remained the linchpin, the person whose actions had set this drama in motion and whose decisions would shape its resolution. She met our collective gaze with surprising steadiness. I want out, she said simply. From the debt. From this town. From the marriage. Her eyes flickered to Daniel. I'm sorry. Daniel nodded once, his jaw tight. I figured as much. What about your parents? I asked. The lien against their home? I'll cancel it, she said. Consider the payments made so far as full satisfaction. George and Martha exchanged relieved glances. And the psychiatric evaluation? Patricia pressed. Already withdrawn, Vanessa confirmed. My lawyer filed the paperwork an hour ago. I studied her carefully, searching for deception but finding only exhaustion. Why the sudden cooperation? A bitter smile curved her lips. Because I know when I'm beaten. And because... She hesitated, glancing at her parents. Because some things shouldn't have a price tag. Patricia gathered her papers briskly. I'll draft the necessary documents. Divorce papers, lien cancellation, formal withdrawal of the competency petition. We can meet tomorrow to sign everything." As she left, the five of us remained at the kitchen table, bound together by circumstance but divided by broken trust. Outside, a light rain began to fall, pattering against the windows like gentle fingertips. "I should go," Vanessa said, rising gracefully. "My hotel." "Stay," Martha interrupted, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Come home with us, just for tonight." Something complicated passed across Vanessa's face: longing, resistance, and finally, surrender. "Okay, Mom." As the Palmers prepared to leave, I pulled George aside. "About your mortgage?" "Keep it," he said surprisingly. "For now, at least. Knowing it's you on the other end of that debt actually makes me sleep better at night." "You trust me that much? After what I kept from you?" He smiled ruefully. "You did it to protect us. Misguided, maybe, but well-intentioned." "That's more than I can say for some." His gaze drifted to his daughter, who stood awkwardly beside her mother near the door. "She wasn't always like this," he said quietly. "Somewhere along the way, she got lost." "Maybe she'll find her way back," I offered. "Maybe," he agreed, though his tone held little conviction. After they left, Daniel and I sat in companionable silence as rain drummed against the roof. The house felt emptier somehow, as if the confrontation had siphoned something vital from its walls. "I failed her," Daniel finally said, his voice barely audible above the rain. "I never saw who she really was." "Love blinds us sometimes," I replied gently. "To flaws, to warning signs. Is it strange that I still love her? After everything? No, son. That just makes you human." He fingered the pocket watch absently, its gold case catching the fading light. "What happens to the farm now?" The question hung between us, weighted with legacy and promise. After all we'd endured to save this land, what would its future hold? "That," I said, "is up to us to decide." 1 year passes like a season on a farm. Gradually, then suddenly, each day bleeding into the next, until you look up and everything has changed. The autumn leaves had turned and fallen, winter had gripped the land with icy fingers, spring had burst forth in riotous green, and summer had baked the fields golden. Now fall approached again, the circle nearly complete. I sat on the porch swing watching the September sun cast long shadows across the fields. In the distance, Daniel inspected the corn, his tall frame moving purposefully through the rows. At 33, my son had grown into himself this past year, finding purpose in preserving our legacy while adapting it for a new era. The divorce had been finalized by Christmas, Vanessa departing for Chicago with a modest settlement that freed her from debt without enriching her unduly. The last we heard, she'd taken a corporate job, her ambitions finding a more suitable arena than our small farming community. The mortgage papers that had sparked the crisis now rested securely in my safe, their power neutralized. George and Martha continued making payments, our friendship stronger for having weathered the storm of truth. Their daughter called occasionally, brief, awkward conversations that nonetheless represented tentative steps toward reconciliation. The screen door creaked open, and Daniel emerged with 2 cups of coffee. "The Peterson wedding is confirmed for next Saturday," he said, handing me a mug. "That makes 15 events this season." I nodded appreciatively. Who would have thought people would pay to get married in our old barn? The renovation had been Daniel's idea, converting the unused north barn into an event venue that generated enough income to sustain the farm without selling a single acre. Morgan Farm's Heritage Venue, he'd called it, combining respect for tradition with practical business sense. "Dad," Daniel said, interrupting my thoughts, There's something I want to talk to you about." I recognized the serious tone. "What is it?" He set his coffee down carefully. "I've been seeing someone for a few months now." My eyebrows rose. "Anyone I know?" "Emma Chen. She teaches agricultural science at the community college." I smiled, remembering the earnest young professor who had consulted with us about sustainable farming practices last spring. "She's a good person. Smart, too." "Very smart," Daniel agreed, "and completely different from Vanessa. Emma loves the land, understands what we're trying to preserve here." The relief in his voice told me how deeply Vanessa's rejection of our way of life had wounded him. "You sound happy, son." "I am," he admitted, "for the first time in a long time." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the changing light play across fields that had sustained our family for generations. In the distance, the newly restored barn stood proudly, its weathered beams holding both our history and our future. "I've been thinking," Daniel said eventually, "about something Vanessa said during our last fight. She called the farm worthless dirt, but she never understood what gives land its value." "And what's that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The people who love it," he replied simply. "The memories it holds, the future it promises." I nodded, pride swelling in my chest. My son had learned what I'd tried to teach him since childhood. That legacy isn't just about ownership or profit. It's about stewardship, about honoring what came before while building something for those who will come after. As evening settled over Morgan Farms, stars appearing like diamond chips in the velvet sky, I felt a profound sense of peace. The farm would continue, perhaps not exactly as it had been, but true to its essence. My son had found his way back to his roots while charting his own path forward. And I had discovered that protecting what matters sometimes means letting go of what you thought mattered most. "Sometimes the land owns us more than we own the land," I said quietly. "And sometimes the debts that matter most are those of the heart." Daniel smiled, the family pocket watch gleaming in his vest pocket, a symbol of continuity, of promises kept. I wouldn't have it any other way. In the end, my daughter-in-law had indeed convinced my son to sell my farm, just not in the way she intended. Instead of selling out, we had invited others in, sharing our heritage while preserving its heart. The mortgage I held over her parents had turned from a potential weapon into a quiet promise of security for their future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new growth. But tonight, it was enough to know that what we had built would endure, not just in acres or buildings, but in values passed from one generation to the next. "Ready to head in, Dad?" Daniel asked. "Just a moment more," I said, drinking in the peace of the evening. It's too perfect to rush. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of family, forgiveness, and finding what truly matters. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between what's right and who you love? Your stories might inspire others facing similar struggles. Remember, in the battle between legacy and change, sometimes the real victory comes when we find a way to honor both.